AskReddit by Animaking 1108. What infamous movie plot hole has an explanation that you're tired of explaining? The Matrix Reloaded, the scene where Neo is talking to the architect. The screens behind them are not other ones. It is the predictions the machines are making on Neo's responses. Most of the scenes are incorrect in those predictions, except for when Neo must choose between Trinity and all of humanity. The machines nailed that response on all screens. Honestly, I'm glad I finally have an explanation for this scene, because they are discussing how many times this has happened before while we're looking at it, and the architect says something about having two different ways to calculate that number of times they've gone through it. Since they are talking about this while we see the different Neos, I always thought that's what they were trying to show. Since it was never explained, I'm just now learning about it. I'd figured out everything else after repeated viewings but never understood that part. There was a whole topic on the front page a while back about the Truman Show, asking about what happens when Truman wants to sleep with his on-screen wife. Is that upsetting to her because she's just an actress? How do they avoid showing it on TV? People offering all kinds of explanations like he was raised not to know what sex is. I thought I was going crazy because not only does the movie directly address this, two guys watching the show complain that the camera always cuts away when Truman and his wife go to bed, but it's an actual plot point in the movie that she's trying to have a baby with him so that they can start Truman Show Phase 2, and his obsession with a woman they kicked off the show years ago is ruining the director's plans. People have apparently never heard of the concept that people are willing to have sex for money and or fame. She would have been well aware what she was signing on for and agreed to it. She was specifically cast to be his love interest and eventual wife, so they found an actress who was willing to do all that entailed. People sometimes wonder how Indiana Jones initially remained skeptical of the mystical events happening in the second film, when he just witnessed a magical art mass killing a bunch of Nazis in the first film. But that's because the second film is a prequel. Also, the majority of artifacts and myths Indiana Jones interacts with are completely mundane. They have fascinating cultural significance and implications on history, but they are ultimately just mundane. The encounters with the supernatural are clearly rare exceptions he gets caught up in, not his primary field of expertise. Like, even if literally Atlantis was discovered right here and now today, that doesn't mean the lost continent of Mu, or the city of El Dorado, or the lost colony of Norumbega, or anything else is real. It means Atlantis is, apparently, real. How does Sarah Connor know which button to press to crush the Terminator in Terminator, 1984? Because she accidentally presses it a few minutes earlier and it set the crusher off. It would lead the Terminator to find them. Oh, like in The Incredibles where Ella Fitzgerald has the remote and Bob tells her to push that button again. In Memento, people always wonder how a guy with short-term memory loss remembers he has memory loss. But he's conditioned himself to say it, just like Sammy was subjected to conditioning in the flashbacks. I love that movie. Everything makes sense but you still have questions once it's over. One of Charles Foster Kane's servants was outside his bedroom when Kane said Rosebud. The door was wide open. The dialogue later confirms that a butler heard Kane's dying words and reported it to the paper. Was going to post this. I watched the movie long after I'd seen all the BuzzFeed style articles about biggest plot holes. Yet when I watched it I was confused, as it explains that people heard it pretty clearly. Friends. How did they pay for that apartment on their salary in New York? The very first episode, Monica mentions that her grandma owned the apartment, and she would never be able to afford it otherwise. And it was rent controlled. Plus I think it was an illegal sublease and they had to hide that from the super. On watching The Sixth Sense, it may seem completely improbable that Bruce Willis' character didn't realize that he was dead. Yet it's explained right there in the movie. Ghosts see only what they want to see. They show it in the movie. He can't see things that are different since his death, like the table in front of the basement door. In Jurassic World, Claire didn't outrun the T-Rex in heels because it wasn't chasing her. The dinosaur was conditioned to equate the flare with feeding time, so it was patiently following her to an anticipated meal. The situation is similar to how zookeepers can have limited interactions with lions and bears. Well, I'll be damned. Katniss, who nearly died in the Hunger Games twice, yet still had sympathy for the children of the Capitol, wasn't acting out of character when she agreed to Coin's idea of one last symbolic Hunger Games with the Capitol children. When Coin suggested the symbolic Hunger Games, that was the moment Katniss made up her mind to assassinate her, but I think she had been considering it long before then. She only agreed so Coin wouldn't suspect anything. Plus it's very clearly stated that she, Haymitch, and Peter had all agreed to just keep their heads down and not get noticed by anyone. Like the book just says that. Toy Story. Buzz stops moving in front of humans but doesn't think he's a toy. His delusion is the whole point. It's what drives Woody crazy. He tries explaining it to him. You are a toy. Buzz has training from Space Academy, and the brown bear play dead procedure is taught if you are found by a huge alien creature and unable to run. Encanto. Bruno in the walls and Dolores knowing. Not only does she state during the song she can hear him, and at the end of the movie says she knew. This whole family broke into song about we don't talk about Bruno at the mention of the man, so she was basically told probably the same when she tried to tell the family. Mama, I can hear Shio Bruno in the. It was my wedding day. Not exactly a plot hole, but I hate when people misinterpret the scene in The Incredibles where Violet saves Dash from being shot at her intending to take the bullets for him. Yes, Dash says how are you doing that, and she responds I don't know, but that he means is suspending herself in midair inside a spherical force field, which she's never done before. She already knew how to make dome-shaped fields big enough to cover Dash. We saw her do that when they were fighting at dinner earlier in the movie. She jumped in front of Dash because that was the only way she could get close enough to him in time to protect him, since she had not yet learned how to make force fields far away from herself like we see her do when fighting the Underminer in the sequel. It was also about maintaining them. All throughout the earlier movie she can only create them for seconds, hence her being unable to protect the plane, and the force field hitting Dash briefly, but when her little brother is in danger she doesn't think, she just does, leading her to being able to produce and maintain it for the first time ever, protecting both her and Dash despite being shot at. The first rule of Fight Club, and their growing number of members, is because it is meant to teach the members to break rules. And more than that, it's to teach them to secretly break rules. They aren't intending to start a war like redcoats lining up in formation. It's supposed to be on the down low. Is there some kind of Mandela effect going on with the Titanic movie? Why doesn't Rose let Jack get on? They can both fit. Jack does try to get on. It starts to sink with both of their weight on it. It's a case of people thinking if they spent enough time solving the problem, they could figure it out. Hell, Mythbusters showed that by rigging up the life preservers, they could both fit on. It was dark and the water was ice cold. Every minute in the water was risking death. They tried it once, it failed. Jack made a call. That was an entirely reasonable decision given the circumstances. Deleted. The book adds even more to this about how the first few generations of dinosaurs moved too fast and they slowed them down to match people's expectations. I don't know if you'd call it a plot hole, but I have had to explain it to people before. Jenny didn't think she was in love with Forrest because she thought she was taking advantage of him in the same way her father molested her. He was mentally challenged. She knew this. She had seen it her entire life. She didn't think he was emotionally capable of knowing what real love is. She didn't want to turn into her father. Not with the one person who actually treated her like a human being. She also blamed herself for leading him on because she thought she was abusing him, the way her father did with her. which drove her into a self-destructive life path. For the people who spend all the Star Wars movies saying, why don't they just Jedi mind trick everyone into doing this or that, Obi-Wan is very clear the first time he uses it that it works on the weak-minded. I think the way stormtroopers function throughout the first 3 films shows they aren't the sharpest tools in the shed and are probably bred trained selected to do whatever without question and just be cannon fodder. If I thought you could be an officer on the Death Star, you wouldn't be working at a checkpoint on Tatooine. That guy's CO probably. Everyone always asks why there was a desert in Washington DC in Transformers 2. It has been clearly explained in a ton of discussions of that movie that it was just a really bad movie. LMAO, never realized it was Washington. From Independence Day. How could a virus programmed on Earth computers destroy the computer system of an alien civilization? In a deleted scene, it's revealed that technology from the spaceship at Area 51 was harvested and used as the basis for most of Earth's post-WW2 computer technology. Once you know that, the whole thing becomes a lot more believable. I prefer to think that the alien computers couldn't decipher the macOS so it exploded itself. Home Alone, it's very clearly explained how they paid for the trip to Paris and that Kevin's dad didn't foot the bill. I never realized there was a plot hole with paying for the trip. What exactly is the supposed plot hole? Dark Knight Rises, how did Bruce Wayne magically get to Gotham after he escaped the hole? 1. In an adjacent scene it's mentioned the bomb will go off in a month, so we can assume that's how long he has to get back to Gotham. 2. Wayne Enterprises has offices around the world. All he needs to do is get to an office, log in, and wire himself money or supplies to get home. He's Batman, he can easily do this without being noticed. 3. Batman Begins has a whole sequence of him traveling around the world penniless and nameless. This is a specific skill it's already established he has. There are tons of plot holes in that movie, but for some reason people get hung up on the easiest one to explain. The bigger plot hole was Bruce Wayne healing a busted spine by popping a vertebrae into place and hanging from a rope for a bit in a dungeon. I ain't the G Hauser, but that doesn't seem realistic. Tom Cruise is not the last Samurai, Ken Watanabe's. Cruise is just the pod character. It's not a white savior movie, but instead is a white colonialist learning about the value of native cultures and people. And Daniel Day-Lewis is not the last Mohican, his adoptive father is. I'm not quite sure if this will be clear since I'm not a native English speaker. In Endgame, at least in the reviews, I've always heard that Tony finds the solution to time travel at his first try and how lucky he is. The night he finds the solution, he had told the AI to run one last simulation before stop it for the day. That, added to all the time that he has been without sleep or doing it badly, suggests that he has never stopped looking for a solution and that he did not find it the first day he looked for it. He also presumably now had access to some of Pyme's work, the quantum technology that is the basis for the time travel they end up using, which has them all wearing Ant-Man-like suits, now that Scott had returned. Contact. People talked about the second machine coming out of nowhere. False. It's stated soon after they discover the plans for building it that Japan has bid to take itself out of the consideration for piloting the first machine if they are granted the right to build their own machine instead. Even Family Guy echoed the false idea in the Misery parody, though FG isn't a news source, it annoyed me that they gave the false idea a platform. But why male models? Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a male model. You're goddamn right he wasn't, but the two lookers who capped Kennedy from the grassy knoll sure as shit were. Jack and Rose couldn't both fit on the door in Titanic. In the movie, they try to both get on the door and it capsizes, because the door isn't buoyant enough with both of them on it. Jack then gets off the door so Rose can get more of herself out of the water. It's in the movie. They try to do it in the movie and it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how much surface area the door had, it's the buoyancy of the door that was the problem. Mythbusters did it where they took the life jacket Rose had and tied it to the weak corner of the door, giving it enough lift for both of them to survive. So all Jack and Rose needed to do was put their engineering degrees to good use, write out a plan, experiment with different ways of staying afloat, and they would have been just fine. The McFlys briefly meet a guy named Marty in high school. They had no pictures of him. Their youngest son kind of reminds him of the guy. But they don't know about time travel. George trusts his wife. George never stood up for himself. By punching Biff, he got a confidence boost. This changed the course of his life for the better. Biff never recovered. I had a college friend send a picture of us to me from 20 years ago from a number I didn't know. I didn't recognize myself. If you watched your child grow up for years, you wouldn't suddenly say, "Hey, doesn't he look like that kid we knew for a week 30 years ago?" Especially because there were no pictures of Calvin Klein. You'd probably just see the designer and assumed that was who you met. And even if they did realize, their reaction would be more like, "Huh, isn't that a weird coincidence?" rather than "Holy shit, our son is a time traveler." This is a plot hole that I solved for myself. In the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, the Joker is poisoning the residents of Gotham using parade balloons filled with gas. Batman swoops in with a Batwing and uses a scissor thing on the nose of the Batwing to grab the ropes of the balloons and fly them away from the city. It always bothered me that the Batwing would have scissors or a giant claw on the front because it would be a useless tool for fighting bad guys. It wasn't until this scene in The Dark Knight more than 20 years later that the claw on the front of the Batwing made sense to me. https://yahoo.be/7b0gh8sles8?152. The claw on the front of the Batwing is for a skyhook system for extracting Batman or others from troubled spots where the Batwing cannot land. Batman just made use of it to grab the balloons so he could pull them away from Gotham. Stormtroopers purposely missing Luke and Leia and letting them escape so they can find the rebel base. Yeah, and most other scenes in the rest of the movies they aim just fine. Also, Obi-Wan could be exaggerated their skill to Luke in the first movie. The Karate Kid. Both Johnny Lawrence and Dutch both score on kicks to the face in the All Valley Karate Tournament. The crane kick is legal. Han Solo knows what a parsec is. He was bluffing what he thought was a couple of yokels. The script says as much, and there's a reaction shot. Yeah, if you go back and watch the scene, the look Kenobi gives him after that line says it all. Deleted. I have trouble recognizing faces of people from show. There's no chance Marty McFly's parents recognize a kid they met a few times back in the 50s. Not necessarily a plot hole, but I'm sick of hearing how Raiders of the Lost Ark would turn out exactly the same without Indiana Jones. I don't think that's an accident. It's probably true of a lot of other movies as well, and is definitely true of real life quests that people have done. The adventure Indy has is the point of the movie. It isn't even true. Maybe the bulk plays out the same, but without Indy you have a bunch of dead Germans with the Ark, another group come and now the Germans have the Ark. Since Indy was there and survived, the US has the Ark. Also, Marion is likely dead. I doubt they planned to ask nicely for the medallion and then walk away, or that she would hand it over if they did. The Dark Knight Rises. Bruce escapes the prison that's in the middle of nowhere, and the plot hole is how he got back to Gorham fast enough to save the city. When he escapes, you can very clearly see a town in the background that's within walking distance. It can be very easily explained that he made a freaking phone call and flew back. Another thread mentioned that there was a month between when he escaped the prison and returned to Gotham. They noted it was mentioned in the movie. Since a lot of people are mentioning the friend's apartment, The Simpsons explains how the family got their house, too. Homer's dad sold the rundown shanty he was living in, which he himself won on a crooked 50s game show, to get them the extra money they needed to afford the place. In return, Homer moved him in with them, but got his fill of him pretty quickly and sent him to the retirement home where he lives now. The weight gain in Mean Girls. Regina constantly obsesses over her weight and appearance, so how did she not notice she gained a shit ton of weight? In the deleted scene that was meant to be in the montage of her trying to sabotage Regina, she rigs her weight scale so it always stays the same. Should have put that in the movie. She literally said these bars suck and Katie says yeah, you're supposed to bloat like crazy and the fat turns to water and then you lose it all. The creatures at the end of the movie AI are not aliens. They are the evolution of robots, David. That's why they are so compassionate towards him. I saw this movie when I was about 6 years old and the movie ending on such a sad note I cried while hugging my mom because it was super sad. I did think they were aliens at that time, but I watched it with my girl recently and it didn't fit that they were aliens. Not a movie, but Walter White had perfectly good health insurance. He became Heisenberg because he wanted to leave a ton of money to his family. His health insurance didn't pay for his care because he went to a private pay doctor that Marie pushed for. Also, his former colleagues offered to pay for his care when he went to the birthday party. Not a movie, but The Office TV show. Ever since it ended, people have had a theory that Toby was the Scranton Strangler. Toby was on the Strangler's jury, convicted him, and later visited him in prison, to say he now thinks he may be innocent. During the visit, the Strangler strangled Toby, leaving him in a neck brace. They clearly convicted the right man. I mean, the common rebuttal there is that Toby went to the prison and told the guy the truth, that Toby was the real Strangler and then put the guy in jail himself, and the guy attacked him in retaliation. But obviously the whole thing is more of a silly thought experiment than a legitimate theory or plot hole.